Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, a travel podcast. I'm Darcy Melton, and with me is...
Nathaniel Mellor. Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. We are welcoming ourselves back to our house. We're no longer house sitting in Rome. We're back in the living room / art studio / recording studio.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening, I guess to today, the day that we're going to release it, August 15th of 2023. Happy Ferragosto to anyone who celebrates. If you don't celebrate, then just good luck on having nothing open in Italy all day.
Oh, you mean for people who are here but aren't celebrating?
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking for people around the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I thought it was an Italian holiday. I guess it is a Catholic holiday.
What are you talking about?
Ferragosto.
Yeah.
Isn't it a Catholic holiday or is it an Italian holiday?
Well, they're one and the same for the purposes of the holiday, I'm assuming.
I know. They stole it from somebody else. So it's a whole thing. I mean, they stole it from a different Roman, I believe. It was supposed to be these August 1st, like a big feast to celebrate the end of the harvest. And then they shifted it to the 15th to celebrate the Assumption of Mary. So I assume it's Catholic. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the sense like La Repubblica, the day for the Republic, is Italian.
Yes.
So I guess celebrations all around. Gather around. We're going to go out and watch fireworks and potentially some awful Napolitano pop star later.
I'm very excited.
I'm pumped. There's supposed to be donuts. It's what's getting us there. Mm-hmm. It's also just below our house, so it's going to be a nightmare to sleep.
Yeah. So we're going to the festivities.
We are going to the festivities.
So let's talk about somewhere that's not here.
Let's talk about Siena, actually.
Let's talk about Siena.
Let's just do a whole episode. It's like all you can fit in one episode on Siena. The do's, the don'ts, the must-sees, the mustn't-sees.
Mm-hmm. The day trips.
The day trips.
But tomorrow is one of the Palio.
Well, Leia, what am I talking about? Yeah. Well, Leia it is.
That Southern slipped in there.
I just cut that. We are not cutting that, apparently. We've taken a second to gather ourselves. The co-host, Darcy Melton, decided that it was better left in.
I think it's very cute.
Okay. Anywho, we're talking about Siena. We're talking about day trips, eats, food, the whole 9 yards. Not gelato, unfortunately. It wasn't very good gelato. We're talking about the Palio. Mm-hmm. And before we get into that, if you want to support our lovely podcast, we think it's lovely. I hope you think it's lovely as well. You can do so with the link below to Trainline. It's how we get all of our tickets, buses, the whole 9 yards. If you're going to Siena for a day trip, if you're going to go there from Rome or Florence, very easy to find tickets there. And yeah, it'll support the channel to help us out, and we'd super duper appreciate it.
Yeah. And can people also buy tickets on tickets?
People can also buy tickets on tickets, which will also be in the description below. If you and we're actually going to mention that maybe a little later too. But for the Duomo in Siena, you have to actually have a ticket. It is not free like it is in Rome or Florence. Mm-hmm. So we'll have a link in the description for that, because it's so much easier to go through the tickets link than it is through the actual link, which was a
we'll
nightmare.
Talk about that later in the episode.
Yeah.
We tried that while we were just doing quick research, updating our brains for this episode. It's a pain to try to buy the tickets through the regular website for the Duomo. Anyways, we'll talk about that later on in the episode.
And like always, if you basically can follow us on Spotify or like us or leave us a review, we would absolutely, deeply, lovingly appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I know it takes a minute out of your day, or probably like 7 minutes. I don't know. It takes me forever to leave a review. I'm always over there what should I say? Just, it's awesome, exclamation point. So I totally understand if that's a big ask. I don't know if I leave reviews that often. I do on Google Maps because they give you these little points, but that's kind of ridiculous.
Because you get rewarded for it.
I get rewarded for it. It's gamification is ruining me. So Siena, home to a lot of things, and probably most famously is the Palio, the Palio, the horse race.
Yeah.
I'm realizing I had not heard of it before going there, so I'm going to assume, or that's not true. I'd heard of it, and for some inexplicable reason thought it was in Vienna, not Siena. So I was very surprised.
I think people also get it confused with the running of the bulls.
That's a good point.
It's just some large animals running around.
That's a good point. So we're going to sort of treat it as if you've never heard of what the Palio is. And it's a horse race started in 1633.
Yeah.
And before that, there were other races, I think, like foot races, bullfighting.
Yeah, since the 1400s, there were races that I always say families. That's not what they are. The contrade, the neighborhoods, basically.
Yeah,
is what they
wards is what they use their English translation, but neighborhoods, quarter, I think, is another one.
So basically the wards or neighborhoods around Siena have these little, I guess I think of it as competitions,
Rivalries.
rivalries. That's the word. Yeah. So they all have their little, what do you call it? A livery?
Yeah, they have like their like the well, I guess they all have
Little flag
a symbol of the
thing,
house.
symbol.
There's like there's a little owl. There's like wave, which is not a symbol. Nobody cares about giraffe, dragon,
Unicorn.
unicorn.
Yeah. There's 17 of them.
There's 17 contrade, the houses, and it's interesting if you go not or if you go during the horse race, which is in the summer, July 2nd. They will pretty much, like when I went, I happened to go by accident, and they deck out each quarter with like, I mean, the street lamps change into like basically something symbolic of their icon, of their symbol, of their crest, I think maybe is a better word for it. So it's like, I mean, there's one, I think it might even be wave, unless it's a fish one.
Well, there's the fish, I'm going to call it the fish neighborhood. When we were in Siena in October, which is not when, there are 2 Palios a year these days. There used to just be one, and now there's 2. I mean, hundreds of years ago, this change happened. Yeah?
Yeah, 200, I think, give or take.
But when we were there, they have the lanterns in that neighborhood are all fish, and they're all painted different fun colors.
And there's like a fountain, a couple 100-year-old fountain, that exact same fish. So it's kind of like a pretty steady, like, I don't know, it's like the iconography is quite consistent.
When you're there, when it's not during the Palio, there are other. Not every neighborhood has these fancy lamps, but there are other indications of what neighborhood you're in.
Yeah. And I think something, maybe before we start talking too much about the race, is this is something that's told to me. But like when I went, for one, there was like a lot of the different quarters had these like giant tables. I mean, it was not a giant table. It was, 30 smaller tables put together. That was supposed to be sort of like for the meal after the race. It's not, maybe they invite like strangers to it. I got the impression, and from what people told me, is it's very much just for the people of that family. These are like really close-knit sort of groups. It's not like, I mean, I say that because in a lot of Italy, it's sort of like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like you're on something like today, the Assumption of Mary, if you're walking around, you see a giant table, there's a 30 to 40% chance somebody's going to invite you to have a meal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that might be a northern versus southern thing. We have an episode on that if you want to learn more about North versus South. No, but I mean, in the South, like all the festivals we go to, sometimes we'll see like a big table. And there's been a couple that people saw us like ogling the food, and they were like, oh, this is, for the people working, but you can totally grab something. Like if you had lunch today, have some wine, have
That's
some
a
this
big
thing.
thing. Yeah, like this is just for workers, but if you want to, you could totally like have a bite.
Yeah.
No, and I say that because the other big like piece of information that was given to me is that a lot of people are selling like the scarves and the hats and the flags of the different quarters, and basically like a lot of the Italians are sort of like, if you don't belong to one of them, don't wear the stuff. Like you could absolutely get in a fight with someone. Like it can get really, really violent, especially kind of late in the evening when people start drinking, and you don't realize that you stumbled into a neighborhood that's like has a rivalry with what you're wearing, kind of thing. So everything I was hearing, like,
and it's easy to stumble into neighborhoods.
Oh my God, they're tiny.
Siena is very small.
Yeah, no, we'll mention that I think in a minute. It's like a 25-30 minute walk from one side to the other in the old historic area. So just if you're going, it's a little bit like if you're in America, I could almost be compared maybe to like something like a Super Bowl, or even like I don't know. I'm just thinking like sometimes England gets a bad rep for having like violence at soccer games, and it's a little like that, where it's like, you wore the wrong jersey in the wrong part of the stadium. You should not have done that. So there's a little bit of that kind of vibe. I mean, it's very cool when you're an outsider. I think it's like very relaxed, and I mean, nobody's outwardly aggressive. It's just like there's a few of the Italians, like the Airbnb host and a few people around town that were friends with some of the people we were visiting. Were very like, if you're going to buy something, just buy it and take it home. Don't actually wear it out. Like never wear it out. So that's just something to go ahead and preempt this lovely Palio section on. No, so it's basically horse race. It typically takes place in July 2nd, and now they, like you mentioned,
August 16th.
August 16th, which is tomorrow. For any of our dear listeners who listen to us come out and you're in Siena, you can go see it tomorrow. They're both, I mean, I think they, like you mentioned, they were only having the one for many years, and they occasionally do the August 1st in honor of the Assumption of Mary. And then I think in like the 1800s, it became a
standard.
Yeah, standard. And they occasionally have like ones sometimes for like big events.
Other things. Yeah. Like what the Apollo 11 moon landing had one.
So that was kind of wild. It's like the bicentennial of like the ending of World War II, or the Great War, the centennial, the ending of the Great War. It's like these certain milestones will have a palio, and it's fascinating. I mean, we looked it up because I feel like with something like this, you have to look it up. You can't like
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I both knew about it vaguely, but not any of the specifics. One thing I found interesting is that, so we said that the contrade, the wards, all have a horse, basically, that they compete with and a jockey, but only 10 of those wards compete every year. And that's because it's just, it was unsafe to have so many horses in the racing space, and they race around the Piazza del Campo.
That's true. And how many contrada are there though?
17.
There we go. I don't know. I just like we just did all this research. I'm like, can we do it?
Yeah.
Can we do it by memory?
So what is kind of cool in it, it seems fair to me. So every year, 10 of the contrada compete with their horse and their jockey, and then the next year, the 7 that were not competing automatically compete in that year's, plus 3 who are randomly chosen in like a lottery. So I find that fascinating. Seems pretty
Plus,
fair.
though, they are assigned their horses only like a week or two before the actual
Yes.
race.
I always thought that like each, I'm going to say family or like neighborhood or, the overarching group, I thought each of them had a horse that they took care of, and that was like their pride and joy, that horse or horses. But that's not true.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently, it's like there are, I guess, horse owners or people who raise horses or families who raise horses, and there's a lot of bargaining, a lot of deals being struck of which ones are going to enter the race. And I can only imagine there's like some sort of finagling where there's a couple of horses that aren't as good as some of the other horses in the hopes that you're not the one who draws that horse. I have no
Possibly,
idea.
I have no idea.
I mean, I was hearing stories when I was in Siena of like, basically you have a 24-hour guard on these horses. There's somebody up all night. It's like, or 2 people. There was, I mean,
Because people try to sabotage the
yeah,
other,
like either killing the
competing
horse or like
yeah.
drugging the horse. I mean,
That still happens?
hopefully not. I assume
Okay.
not because it's 2023, but you never know. No, and it's just I think it's one of those things where I mean, it's sort of like when we talk about Naples, it's like only a percentage of that is probably true. But I imagine was a time where you would probably deliberately are sabotaging, because one of the rules of the Palio is that the jockey doesn't need to finish.
Yeah, just the horse.
Just the horse. So it's not uncommon to see 2 jockeys start fighting, one tearing the other jockey off the horse. And
And the jockeys can like hit each other and
Yeah.
like run into each other to try to knock the other one off the horse.
it's a fascinatingly barbaric
Yeah.
like but I feel like that's one of those sort of like there's no OSHA guidelines that like followed this into the 21st century. It's still quite like, oh, we were just this was just the rules.
And speaking of like OSHA and safety, they in 1999 changed the course because, like we said, it goes around the Piazza del Campo, and if you have been there or go there, it's large for a piazza, but it is tiny for
Yeah.
a horse race. And there was this infamous turn that injured and killed many horses. And so in 1999, they changed that turn by adding
Basically, it's just sort of I think it's just all they did is add
like a somewhat soft barricade.
like something like something that can take a lot of damage, because it's like it's a very tight turn, and a lot of the videos you'll see them come around the turn, and they being the horses and the jockeys will just slam into this, and apparently it's leading to a lot of broken legs with the horses, because it's like the Palio is something again it's one of the things I should have known, because like I was there, but it's only about 70 to 90 seconds long. It's just 3 laps around the inside of the Piazza del Campo, and that's
horses
it.
are fast.
Yeah,
and
and
it's a
it's
tiny
just-
little stretch.
That's all there is. You're either slammed on the bleachers or you're right in the middle of the piazza.
That's something that blows my mind is
Yeah.
that people can stand. I mean, you're barricaded in, so you're not going to run out in front of the horses. But like,
Well, people do. Like as soon as it's over, people like are
yes.
in the.
Okay, so when you basically, if you have seen a picture of the Piazza del Campo, and you can look one up, you can be on the bleachers, which surround the piazza, or you can be in a window, because there's buildings that go around the whole thing, or you can stand in the center, which is where you were, right? And that I just think that's just a big old mosh pit.
Well, they also they no longer let like kids under 8 in the middle or something like that,
Yeah.
because it's just like they're slipping through the bars.
We're getting squished, I imagine.
Or getting squished. That was the other thing. It is a bit of everyone turns to watch the event, so you kind of all, I don't know, it's all this like gyrating happening in the middle. But it's fascinating. We just went to Siena a couple months ago with your mom. I had never noticed that there's all these balconies that overlook the Piazza del Campo, and all of them are really reinforced in comparison.
Yes, to like regular
To like
balconies
it's like,
in the
oh, it's
rest
like,
of the country.
yeah, or like a lot of them, like, oh, that's one or two, maybe three supports, fine, okay. But this one was like everyone had multiple, like these cast iron struts or something like that, which makes sense because you're holding, I imagine, parties where you're
All hanging out the window.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is it's a fascinating like little. I mean, it's an event. It's a month-long event in the sense there's like a lot of pre-races. There's this and that. There's kind of these practice races a few nights before, like for the nights leading up to the final race. It's very, it's very chaotic. I think it's also like we just mentioned, like as soon as the race is over, people do swarm
Yes,
the
like
the
jump
track.
over the barricades into the track.
There's still horses going like full
Force,
speed,
yeah.
just like knocking people over without a problem. It seems just wild. It just seems kind of a crazy. But if you enjoy sporting events of that nature, it is definitely worth seeing. I mean, it's just one of those sort of, again, glimpses into the past where you have these different houses and they're all singing and they're like fighting to each other while it's happening, and they're it's wild. It really is a wild experience. So that's what's, I think, most famous for, potentially.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, apart from the fact it's Siena, so it's kind of like famous for being Siena, but there's, I think, like of the events, of the things,
of the spectacles. Yes.
the Palio is probably the most famous. And I think that pretty much covers like all. I mean, I definitely recommend people to research into it. Just in general, to like kind of see what you're getting yourself into. Again, it was fun to go, but
It is super popular too, obviously.
yeah.
I mean,
Oh, God,
while
yeah.
you and I maybe didn't know that much about it, a lot of people do. And like Nathaniel said, it is maybe one of the biggest reasons that Siena is famous. So if you are planning to go to Siena on, when is it?
the second,
Around,
of July.
Yeah, 2nd of July or August 16th, and you don't want to see the Palio,
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
suggest changing your itinerary, because I imagine Airbnbs, hotels, and everything are going to be more expensive during that time because so many people
Oh,
want to be
for
there.
sure. And the same, it's like leading up, as I mentioned, it's all leading up to I think it's 4 races leading up to the Palio, I think on each of the events. And they all happen in the Piazza del Campo, which, for anyone who's curious, if you've ever been there, it's sloped and it's brick. So what they do is they do pour basically a combination of like, it's sort of like just dirt and sand down.
And clay,
Yeah, that kind of gives it a nice thing. It's still sloped quite a bit. So the horses still have to go down and then up, which makes it, again, slightly more difficult as well. But just in case anyone's seen Siena, like, wait, it's all brick. What are they racing on? But yeah, no, it's just, if you're going to go on like, July 3rd is probably going to be a lot cheaper to stay than like July, 1st, but even like, June 30th, just because there are some, practice races you can see if you don't want to see the actual Palio. But like always, I think we never really talked about this, but August is just a terrible month to visit Italy in general.
Yeah.
In many, just in the sense that a lot of things are closed. Everyone's on vacation. The beaches are packed with every Italian in Italy.
And when we say everyone's on vacation, we really mean almost everyone is on vacation. I think that you and I, when we first heard that, Italians go on vacation in August, we're like, right, a lot of people. So many things are closed. Like, people are gone. That's not to say you won't see people in your town, but majoritively, everybody went to the beach.
That's the thing, and we say that like assuming you're going to go to Florence or Rome or Siena or something like that, in these tiny outlying towns where people's like families are from, where they might be from, those get a little bit more populated. Where we are currently, triples or quadruples in size, from like 800 people to like 3,200 people.
Because people came back to their family houses. Where
Exactly.
It's cooler. We're on a mountain. There's
cheaper.
Cheaper.
It's free house.
In driving distance of a beach.
A lot of festivals happening. A lot of the small towns do a lot of these little festivals for the Ferragosto or whatever it is. They'll have their own like tiny festivals for, not tiny, but tiny in the sense of just like maybe that town or that region has a festival. We went to something about this, like the Princess of Costanza, just the other day, which is this whole like medieval thing. It was fascinating. But all that is to say is, if you are in Rome, Florence, Siena, Milan, Venice, by and large, a lot of people will go leave for the entire month of August, or a couple weeks of August, and whoever doesn't leave will leave in September. So if you're like, I'll go September instead, it gets a little rocky. Personally, I think October is a great time to visit, but you wouldn't see the Palio. So maybe not amazing to visit if you want to see a horse race.
Yeah, I would imagine Siena's a little bit different because they do have the Palio tomorrow, August 16th. So they might take their vacation
In September.
Yeah, differently. But we were just in Rome and so many things were closed.
I mean, it's amazing. Like literally July 31st to August 1st, it was like cafes that we frequented, small shops that we like to pop into. I mean, bakeries, pizza places, everything was just like, oh my God. It's like a ghost town all of a sudden. I mean,
Vacation.
just no one driving around. It was really like literally from one day to the next, which is wild because it was like from a Tuesday to a Wednesday or something ridiculous. It was everyone's like, anyway, I'm not going to work tomorrow. So that's just a little warning for anyone who's considering going. So moving on, I guess, past the
Palio.
Palio.
Yeah. Let's
Past
talk
the
about
Palio.
past the Palio. Let's talk about the Duomo.
Oh, the
I
Palio
mean-
to the Duomo.
Palio to the Duomo. That sounds like a book.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it's not that far along. It's maybe a 3-minute walk.
Yeah.
But
A lot can happen in 3 minutes.
I was going to say it's a
Ooh,
walk
put
that took
put that on
100
the book
years.
cover.
A lot can happen in 3 minutes. Yeah. It sounds like a good book. I'd read it. It's like a mystery.
Yeah.
Or maybe it could be a romance novel.
Maybe
It
both.
sounds like a romance novel, though, from the Palio to the Duomo, coming this fall in
Well,
BC.
speaking of romance novels,
Okay.
Romeo and Juliet.
Is apparently based off of the houses of Siena.
Yes.
Which I thought was fascinating. This is, how do we say, take this with a grain of salt, but like the entire bag of salt. No, only because there's a lot of like names and things like that are supposed to be very like slight variations, or even just like the fact that there are houses that have these bitter rivalries that it sort of sits it better in Siena than Verona, I believe is where
Yeah.
it's supposed to take place.
I would say that it's like local color history. We have not verified that information anywhere or
Yeah.
like spoken with Shakespeare.
It's no, we didn't dig them up or wherever they are. But I thought that was an interesting thing, and when you're walking around, you can kind of get that feeling of like, oh, I can see what the inspiration here would be. But the Duomo,
Yeah. So the Duomo,
fascinating building.
it is. It's really cool. It is a giant church, and it's cool on the outside because it has I almost said strata. That's not what it is, but it's layers of like a blackish green marble layered with white marble to make these thick, awesome stripes on the outside. It's really striking.
It is quite like, I think Orvieto has a similar one, but it's quite like particular.
Yeah.
In like to Siena, it's very quite.
And it's kind of an interesting like pattern to choose. It was built in the 13th. What is it? Yeah, the 13th century, so 1200s, and they were like, "Yeah, give me a bold pattern on that building."
Not to mention, and this is where like Siena is one of those. Well, Italy, I think, is one of those places, but like Rome, for instance, there's a lot of like. There's a word for it, but it's basically falsified history. Like it's when people build a history for themselves that like. They can prove they're related to some sort of royalty or some sort of bloodline without actually being related. Like, they might have a similar last name, but it comes from a completely different origin. Rome is like that. Although it started as this like little swampy town that some people from like Latinium like basically sort of conquered, and then they turned it to Rome. They were kind of saying, actually, no, we have 10 generations of kings who blah, 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 descended from so-and-so. Mm-hmm. And Siena is the same way. It was supposed to be the two wee lads who were raised by the wolf.
Yes, Romulus and Remus.
Yeah, and of course when...
Can't believe I just came up with that.
Killing
That's not in my notes, y'all.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So if I'm not mistaken, Romulus killed Remus. They named Rome after him, but also like he escaped, or maybe his kids escaped. Someone escaped. Interestingly though, in front of the Duomo, there's a statue of the wolf and the two boys, as if to like an homage to the town. But that's the sort of... but it gets a little weird. It's a little colonizing, because it's like they're pretending like the Etruscan town wasn't already there. So it's like, no. It wasn't even a town till the Roman got there. So I say that because it's like a lot of these cities in Italy, it has an origin. And then at some point it seems that people have sort of intentionally forgot that origin in order to adopt a different, more dramatic origin.
Or in a mythological.
Or our borderline, or even fully mythological origin, which isn't to say like it's not true. Definitely Romulus might have ridden a horse there. However, that was the whole point, is I believe their horses were black and white. So it was like, that was the whole point for the strata.
I didn't know that.
Sorry, I was tying this whole... There's a lovely little placard sign out front, by the way. This is not research. This is just like, oh yeah, I read the sign. And so apparently the black and white, because it's a theme of Siena. It's like their colors are black and white. and that's the reason for it. It's like one horse is black, one horse is white, so it's kind of like everything in Siena. I mean, and well, not everything. That's a bit of a stretch, but their crest and also their church, like the crest of Siena. Sorry, not Alva Contrade, but like just the actual city itself, are black and white, which is fascinating. If you're basically, it's one of those things. If you're into history and you're into mythology, phenomenal city to visit. It's got a lot going on. In that sense, it seems like it wouldn't, just because you're like, it's tiny, it's up there. It's like, it wouldn't have nearly as much as Rome. But in many ways, I think it's quite steeped in both. It's like Roman history, but also Etruscan history. So it's kind of fascinating to ponder, to wander through.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. That's awesome.
But that's not about the Duomo, really. That was just about the color scheme.
Which is great.
Yeah.
It's good history. So inside the Duomo are these, well, okay, I will say my favorite part inside the Duomo are the floors.
Yes.
And they are covered for much of the year.
Yeah.
They are uncovered near the end of July, late July.
Yeah, it's like roughly at the end of July. They just sort of say, by the end of July, it's usually uncovered for like a week, usually, or maybe two.
Yeah. But then, I mean, I don't know that I would bet on that time because there's no way to
It seems like you have to kind of, you have to like, you would, I don't know if you'd know in advance. It seems like they just sort of choose a time, uncover them for a bit, and then recover them again for all of, well, the first 2 weeks of August, I guess.
Yeah, it's odd. Okay, because they are uncovered from mid-August to mid-October every year. That, I think, is an easier timeline to plan on. So they uncover them at the end of July, cover them back up, reopen them, uncover them in August, cover them back up in October.
It's a little strange.
I don't get it, but...
They're called cartoons, the drawings on the floor. I don't know. I don't know. It kind of like showed me I didn't know anything about cartoons, because I'm like, everything, even in English, and even you look at like on Wikipedia, it says the cartoons on the floor, and you're like, they're not like cartoons per se. They're like sketches. But they're fascinating and they're beautiful. And of course, to clarify, when we say covering the floor, it's like a very thin carpet. You're allowed to walk on the floor the rest of the time.
Right.
It's just sometimes there's a beautiful floor and sometimes it's just a covered floor. So it is fascinating, and it is a little more expensive. I think it's €8 when the floors are uncovered versus $5 when the floors are covered. And there's also a library there that we got the chance to see.
Yes.
It was quite beautiful. And that's not always available. Again, they're a little like unclear on when things are open and when things are closed.
So we were there in October? Late September.
Yes, late September, early October.
Okay. And we just happened to be there at the right time, honestly. And it was great. We got to see the floors. And the library is the Piccolo Mini Library, which is famous for its paintings on the walls and its ornate ceiling. But also, they have these illuminated, I guess they're song books. I don't think there's music in them, but I think it's songs.
Hymnal or songs? Did you find out?
No. My sources said choir books.
Oh.
I would call them a songbook. It could be a hymn, but a hymn book might have to have
Words?
music.
Oh, music.
I think these have words.
Oh, interesting.
But they're beautiful. You can't like touch them or look through them.
Very
but
much not. They're far away from you.
They're open on the walls.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful.
No, so that's worth it to definitely go. And we mentioned at the beginning of this lovely episode that you do actually pay to get into the Duomo in Siena. Just for what it's worth, we were sort of joking, we're not sure what the money is going towards, because it's also like a little bit dirty, the church, like in a sense of it's like,
yeah, okay, so we are used to churches in Rome just because we are often there and often pop into churches, and they're free, and they are typically quite spotless.
but even like, I mean, we're talking not just like the floor, we're talking like high up, the corners, there's no cobwebs, there's no like smoke left over from when everyone's like smoking indoors or whatever it was when they had torches
Last
instead
week,
of,
like,
well, I was thinking like when they had torches and people were just hacking up a lung. No, it's like they're very well maintained. And then Siena.
Yeah, there's like schmutz in the corners and like on parts of the columns and like on the walls.
It's like a sooty something. It's
Like
also
they
like
just haven't
cobwebs.
given it a good wash.
I don't know. And this is not to like disparage. It was just one of those things where, I mean, my understanding, and I could be very wrong, is it's still a church. So there's still part of the church money. I don't know how anything works in the church.
The diocese.
Yeah, like is that, I mean, like, you're still getting money for this. just in the sense that, again, some of these really tiny tiny in the sense of visitors per year in Rome, but like quite large and still ornate, are like, wow, that's actually like clean. It seems well kept up.
Well, one of the ways that churches, they don't just make money from the overarching Catholic Church. Churches do have to make money on their own to stay going. But you would think that if they're charging an entry fee and it's in Siena,
That's what I'm
that they would
thinking.
have enough to clean.
I mean, because it's, for instance, the Pantheon just started charging literally a couple months ago, like I think June, and you said they made $1 million.
They
in
made
their
€1
first...
million in their first month of charging.
And that might be a little high. It might be a little like a number of people who came and planned their trip when it was free, and then it was like, all right, it's, you know, to pay, might as well go in anyway. It's just
I think
€5.
it was July.
July,
yeah,
okay.
was when it was charging.
So it's like they're charging the same amount as the Siena. I mean, you're pulling in $1 million, give or take, and maybe not as much. Let's just say, even if it's like 500,000, and it just felt like one of those things where I'm like, you are charging people to go into a church versus like a lot, like the Duomo is free and a lot. I know I sound like just a really snotty
Maybe we
tourist.
also know nothing about
We know
the
nothing
materials of
yeah.
the church. Maybe there's a reason it is that way.
For sure. No, I think that's one of those things. I know I feel like such a entitled like a tourist. Oh, if I'm going to come here, you're going to have to like make it clean. That's not what I meant to sound like. It was simply
You were just surprised? Is that what
I
you're
was
saying?
quite surprised, I think, with the... Thanks for saving me there. I was quite surprised with just the sort of like, oh, okay, this is interesting. That you have to, like, I mean, when you pay, there's a turnstile, there's a metal detector. I mean, it's like any other tourist site, basically. So it's, I mean, you have to, you know, scan your bag, the whole 9 yards. It's like, you can't just go in. Like, you can't just hand somebody a ticket and then walk in. But the floors.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add about the floors is that the church is from the 13th century is when it was completed. But the floors were not started until the 14th century and then completed in the 16th century. So they're from a different time. But it also took 40 different artists to make them. And when Nathaniel says cartoons, they, like you said, they don't look like what we think of as cartoons, but they do look like they're from a graphic novel. Like,
Yeah.
they really don't look in any sort of, I mean, I'm not a historian, but they were in an unexpected style for me, given how old they are.
That's true. No, that's the thing. It's like they're almost like a very modern style for how old they are.
It's really interesting.
There's also something that, and maybe you researched it because I did not, just about the fact that the church was supposed to be expanded.
Yeah.
And it ended up not being expanded, basically.
Yeah. So they have an unfinished nave, which is just the main part of the church is the nave. So essentially, if you're standing in the piazza outside of the Duomo and you're looking at essentially the front of the church, if you pan your vision around to the right, there's almost like an L-shaped large sidewalky area. It's part of the piazza.
Like a portico kind of area. Yeah.
So basically around that area, you'll see it, no matter my terrible description of this. In there, it's almost, you could almost mistake it for a wall. But what it is the outside of what would have been the extended nave of the church. And so that would have doubled the size of the church, essentially. And I don't remember exactly when that was created. I want to say around the 16th century maybe. But it was halted because of the Black Death. So they just stopped.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw in too, because I did happen to look this up. So the colors are not Remus's and Romulus's colors. It's Remus's son's colors, Senius and Ascius. And their horses were black and white. And they're apparently the ones who escaped, I guess, when their uncle killed their dad. And they were like, we need to get out of town for a bit till things blow over. And then they went to Siena. Well, they went to some other town. And then they're like, anyway, it's named after me now. I assume that's pretty much exactly how it's one of those things that's hard to know. Anywho, no, so yeah, that's the floor is fascinating. Mm-hmm. It is like, as you mentioned, and
if you're not there, we're talking up the floors just because I think we were taken aback by them and we didn't expect it, and it's weird. I mean, many places around Italy have beautiful mosaic floors. These are just quite different. But if you go there and the floors are covered, the Duomo is still beautiful. It's highly decorated. It's quite different from Florence's Duomo, which is very, like, I would call it monastic. But Siena's Duomo is fairly intricate. It's not as big or as, like, museum-like as the Vatican.
No, for sure. Yeah. It was
But
actually, and that's the thing though, you were talking about the piece that was planned was supposed to make it huge because it was basically it was going to triple in size. Essentially, was their
I
plan,
saw
like
double in size.
double in size. Okay, so
Or at least from what we can see of the floor plan, maybe.
and that was the sort of like I think the idea, but apparently because you mentioned the Black Death, one other thing I'd found too is they're basically like it's kind of good that it ended because there's already some mistakes in the old construction. I think there's also a tower attached to the church. And one of the things we found out again when we were there is that it starts at the bottom with one window, and then the next level is two, and then up and up and up, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 7, I think, windows at the top. And it looks like it's just stylistic, but apparently they're like, what it's built on will not hold an actual tower, so they had to cut out a whole bunch. And the sculptor at the time was like, we could just make these windows and lose a lot of weight. So it's one of those things that was like, they had something to do with when they were going to renovate it. They were shifting some things around, raising some things, and they didn't consult like engineers, I guess. They were just like, it looks better.
That is so Italian. Okay, we have a family member who is Italian, and he's an architect, and we have heard so many
horror stories
of people not hiring engineers or architects in Italy because you can also get your house built or renovated by
basically the foreman of a construction company.
Yeah. But sometimes you need an engineer and or an architect. So that just sounds very Italian.
It is incredibly Italian, honestly. It's like that's pure-blooded Italian right there. That's through and through.
Nah, we're fine.
Yeah.
I drew a picture.
But I think that's, I love this country. Those are the two biggest things I think about Siena.
Yeah.
By and large. There's some other churches. Beautiful. There's the Piazza del Campo. You cannot miss it. We'll talk a little bit about other bits and bobs, but like when people talk about Siena, those are pretty much the two main
sites.
Yeah, sites, exhibitions, events.
I will say, I really love Siena, and I think my favorite thing about it is that it's a really easy place to walk around.
For sure.
There are hills. It's not all flat.
If I may, it was an easy place for people who can walk without much of an issue. It's like
yes,
there are a lot of hills, uneven steps. It's like I would say in a wheelchair, it's not very easy at all, given the fact there's enough no super straight, smooth areas. Crutches would also be a nightmare. Walkers would also kind of be a nightmare. So it's one of those things where it's very easy to walk around for somebody who doesn't have to use like any sort of mobility device.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a nightmare if you do.
Probably, yes.
But there are a ton of
defibrillators.
Yeah. Apparently they were just like, people are having heart attacks climbing these hills. We need to invest in some defibrillators.
It's not the hilliest place we've been.
It really isn't.
But I love their commitment to health and safety in that regard. Not in regard to the Palio, which still seems very dangerous to me.
Well, we'll get in there.
No, but for me and you, I think it's a great place to walk around because it's quite small. And aside from the Duomo, which you have to pay to get into, it's just a fun, inexpensive place to walk around in that you don't have to go to like a million museums. You just walk around the town and it's pretty.
I think that's the thing. It's one of those sort of living museum things that people talk about, and I think it's a good example. You can have cheap lunches, you can have cheap pastries, cheap coffee, and have a really good time without having seen the Duomo, without having seen the Palio. If you're trying to travel on a budget, if you do see the Duomo, all the better. I think pretty much all the other churches that we went into are free.
Yes.
I can't think of paying for any other one. So that kind of made it a little better, to be fair. It was just sort of like, oh, okay, nice. We don't have to keep paying for all of these churches. And while there are definitely some, and we'll talk about food in a minute, but while there's some definitely expensive places to eat, there are also a lot of affordable and traditional, like Senese.
I don't know.
There's a lot of E's. Again, this is language. I'm having like a Fiorentina thing, flashbacks all over again. But yeah, there's a lot of like Senese food and bakeries and things like that that can make it basically a very affordable and delicious and like very complete trip.
Yeah, don't expect cheap food around the Piazza del Campo.
No,
that's like one of the only places that are. They're like Nathaniel said, fancy and expensive restaurants, but that's tourist price gouging around.
There is one sandwich place that we heard of, and it didn't go in because it's a crazy line. That's supposed to have decently cheap sandwiches in this sort of Florentinian style. that we didn't go in because it was like, well, we're just in Florence. We don't really want to see them. And that was supposed to be more in that €5 to €8 range.
And that's around the Piazza.
Yeah, that's
del
around
Campo? Okay.
Piazza del Campo. And that was about it. The rest of them were like, oh, okay, we'll find something else.
Yeah.
Because it's also, I think part of it is, especially in the summer, it's just a very open oven.
Yeah.
It's not like there's no shade. It's just stone everywhere. It's not like
In the Piazza?
In the Piazza, yeah. So I think it's one of those things where I don't know. Every time in movies and stuff, they always have somebody sitting there, and I'm like, that'd be the worst place in Siena to sit. It's not quiet or peaceful or anything. It's just loud and hot, and just I don't know. Just like that seems deeply uncomfortable. Sorry. So moving past the two lovely sites.
Well, speaking of being hot and needing shade, there's the thank you for that segue. There's
Perfect. You're welcome.
Fortezza Medicea. Is that how you say it?
I think so.
Which was the Spanish fort, right?
It was basically a Spanish fort in the early-ish 1500s when Siena fell under the rule of like the Spanish king, and he gave it to like one of the, I don't know, they have in Spain barons, one of the counts. Guy built a fort, and he was like, I'm going to subjugate the Senese from here. The Senese rose up.
Subjugate.
I know, great word, right?
Okay.
That's not mine. I read it an hour ago, but still, what a word.
So he was going to rule them from the fort?
From the fort. The Senese was like, we're going to fight back. This sounds terrible. And they did. And then, unfortunately for them, like 15 years later, they lost a war to Florence.
15 years later?
Yeah, I know.
Dang.
Like, there was no time at all. Maybe not. It was like quite, like, maybe even less. It was a very short period where they were like kind of under their own rule there. And then they lost a war to Florence. So my dear boy Cosimo Medici took over. And they say they basically, like Wikipedia and things like that, say he built a fort on the site of the old Spanish fort. But in Siena, they were like, this fort wasn't like torn to the ground or anything. Like, you just had to repair some walls and put in some new windows, and it was good to go. So I'm fairly certain that he just sort of renovated. It wasn't like a turnkey fort. It was just, he just needed his, put in a new flooring, and he was good to go. No, I think he renovated a bit.
It was a fixer-upper.
It was a fixer-upper from a fort. You can't trust these. Well, for him, it'd be Southern Italian forts. 45 minutes south, but come on. Not even an hour and a half. Well, by horseback, what is that, like 8 days? I have no idea how fast horses travel. So he renovated it, did a great job. And then in the 18th century, basically they passed it on for city use. And I think it wasn't until the 1800s, so about 100 years later, they turned it into a city park. And now it's basically, it's an event space. It's a totally open park. There's all the free exercise equipment around, trees, shade. It's a beautiful path. It's beautiful, at the top.
Yeah. Basically, because it kind of overlooks a lot of the city. Mm-hmm. It's a great view. You could take a big walk around the whole thing. It's a lovely shady park, like Nathaniel said. They have like free use public fitness equipment, which is really cool to me. And yeah, it's just really neat.
A nice little place. And then I guess if you're lucky enough, they will have like art events, musical events, things like that.
There's one of the buildings, or maybe the only building that's actually attached to the fort, is like a jazz studio.
It's something. There was a bunch of, and I don't know if it was
musical studio.
Because something else I read said there's actually an Enoteca, which is like a wine bar. Oh. So I don't know if it's just like we happened to be there when a bunch of people were inside practicing jazz, because it was like we walked around for about a couple hours, and all you could hear is people practicing like saxophones and trombones and jazz instruments. I don't. Trumpets, I think, maybe belong to stand-up bass, I believe, is there, and then the drum kits. Yeah, jazz.
Nice. You got it.
But it's basically if you came to Siena on a bus, especially from Florence, not Flixbus, like the Autolino Toscana, it would have dropped you pretty much right at like in town. And instead of going into town, you just kind of walk basically through this public park, and you end up at the fortress. It's really hard to miss. Sort of a beautiful area, great place to kind of relax and just like, again, midsummer, great place to cool off, breeze, the whole 9 yards. It's a nice little area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. I think we were taken aback. I just didn't know it was there. So I found it really lovely.
I think also because we've lived in places like Siena. I mean, we lived in Perugia. We've been to other hilltop towns. And it's not common that you'll see a forested area or maybe a treed area that high up. Like in the area, basically it's not... I don't know, like in
Like
Perugia,
city, like
yeah, there's
city
no park.
parks
It's like
aren't a huge thing.
no, they're really not. So it's just like you have this walled in stony area and then nothing else. And it's just like, I mean, it's nice, but then it's like I need to touch grass.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to touch grass, I guess.
I don't have a segue for the next site, but it's a church.
Okay. If you want to touch grass, no, I've got nothing. I'm like, if you want to pray to Pan, try going to this church, which is not related to Pan at all.
No. Okay.
No segues. Okay, moving on.
So it's got a long name. It's the Basilica Catariniana San Domenico.
Love it.
Yeah, I probably butchered that. But it's a lovely big church. It's not ornate like the
It's
Duomo.
quite like, monastic. Quite,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, monastic. Yeah, it's very plain. It's beautiful
Ascetic,
though.
is that the word?
Possibly.
It's like sort of a very stripped down. I mean, it's a gorgeous church, but it's a very open, beautiful, stripped down, sort of empty church in comparison. But there's a lovely walk there.
Yeah, there's a lovely walk there in in different directions.
Yes. Sorry.
But near there is also the what is it called? The Fonte Branda,
Yeah.
which is we stumbled on it, so I think we were like, wow, we just found this great thing. It's people know about
It was also flooded though, so it was even cool. Like it's supposed to be this kind of little pool that used to be
It was part of the aqueduct system.
part of the aqueduct system, and because it was raining that day, it was completely flooded. So there's some stairs that go down to this, and then there's a little ledge, and then there's this water. But because it was raining, it had flooded the ledge and the stairs, so it's kind of like, oh, we're
You just got
entering
to
this
walk around in it. Yeah.
pool. It was really kind of fascinating. Not that you were swimming or anything like that.
Yeah. No, and we didn't go in the aqueduct.
No,
It
because
was
that's
just the-
super illegal.
Yeah.
We just sort of was like, oh, this is kind of fun. No, it's a nice. It was kind of a. I mean, people know about it. Like you mentioned, yeah, it's part of a tour. It's part of the aqueduct tour. The not the catacomb tour. Is it the
They're called the Bottini.
Bottini tour? Okay.
But this is to see the Bottini, which are it's the aqueduct system under Siena. You have to pay for the tour. You can't just like wander around in them publicly. But this you can see for free, and it's just kind of like open air. It's got a portico over it. Like you can't get into the pool, but you can see it.
Yeah, it's just nice. I think it's just like one of those things. If you're in the area, you're walking around. Oh, there's some water. Let's go look at it.
It's quite neat.
It's a nice little area. Yeah.
And so the Bottini are 25 kilometers, I think, of aqueduct system. And it was used as city water up until the early 20th century. But now they still use it for the fountains around Siena.
That makes sense.
Which
that
is
makes
quite cool.
sense.
And so if you want to get tickets for this, you have to, I'm going to say it here because it's not an easy thing to find. You have to go to terredesiena.it and call the number or email them for tickets. It's a
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really interesting system for getting tickets to see the underground.
It's what is like somebody's uncle you're calling who's
Yeah,
like has the
that's what
keys,
it
and it
seems like.
seems very like
Yeah.
no. Trust me, this is all above board.
So I couldn't find out any information on how much the tickets cost. I can't imagine it would be very much. But yeah, interesting little system. They look really neat from the photos.
I mean, I'd be curious to check it out ourselves, but it's I don't know if we can. Don't know if we can call this number. I mean, we're not going to go now, obviously. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm just like, next time, that'd be cool. We should get the number. So is that the last of sites?
That's the last of our sites.
That's the last of our sites. And because this is going to be like the one-off, not the one-off episode, but one giant, humongous Siena episode, because we realize it's not enough to make the other ones into their own episodes, we're going to segue right into food, because after spending a day staring at stone, like rocks and churches.
In Siena?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might be a little hungry. So
we're not killing it with the segues in this episode.
we're usually a little bit better, I think. I think we're typically like, wow, that's a good segue. I mean, you had some great jokes, some puns last time. I don't know what we're doing.
Not doing any wordplay this episode. But
This is terrible.
anyways, nonetheless. So thinking about cafes and places to get pastries, pasticceria, or a forno, which is where they make bread, the place, when you look up like best pastries, you're probably going to find Pasticceria Nanini. That's Nanini. There are several locations.
There are, and they're also, when you look up the best gelato, Nanini will also pop up. It's a little, it must be like from Siena.
It's a small chain.
Yeah, and they're it's a little like there's one right in the middle of town near the Piazza del Campo, and it's one of those places that's like it's already expensive, and then you have to pay extra if you want to sit in the back, but then everything's brought to you. But even if you sit in the front where you sit yourself and bring your own food, it's still like just weirdly expensive in the sense
It
that
is
it's like
quite
wow,
expensive compared to other pastry shops.
in the same city.
Yes.
In the same town.
I mean, it's good though, and you mean the pastries are good as well?
No, the pastries are great. Yeah, no,
And they have a wide selection. I'm not trying to talk them up. I definitely suggest going to a different pastry shop, but they do have a wide selection of Italian and Senese pastries.
They also have a lot of panforte, which is I'm pretty sure it's from Siena. It's just essentially a cake, pan meaning bread, but it's like cake. It's like a fruit cake, which sounds an awful explanation, but essentially it's like dates and walnuts, or like dates and figs and nuts, sort of all cut up and smashed together. It's quite popular. It's especially in the
and spices. Did you say
and
spices?
spices. There are spices, and I mean they all change. I mean, some of them have chocolate in, some don't have chocolate, some have like syrups kind of thing, not in it, but like they sort of soak in a syrup. And Nannini has a bunch there that they make. But panforte is something you're gonna be seeing everywhere in Siena. It's definitely worth it if you can eat those things and just get some to bring back. They're better versions of fruitcake.
Yes.
They're not fruitcake at all. It's just like they're literally like a little cake of fruit. But they're supposed to be eaten like in the winter when you're just gonna load up with protein and fiber and sugar. I don't really.
I mean, they're also great with the Vin Santo.
They're also great. The Vin Santo, yeah.
And if you do want to get one to take home with you, so like Nathaniel said, you can get them in all of the pastry shops and probably the bread shops around Siena. And everybody has their different recipes for them or different various flavors. But if you want to get one to take home, I recommend going to a grocery store because they'll have it like sealed essentially.
That's a good point. And they're still pretty good from the grocery store. Yeah. Like you're not going to get like terrible quality from the grocery store at all. You're going to get a pretty good quality. And like you mentioned, it's like plastic sealed. So it's kind of like not like they just fold it in paper and assuming you're going to eat it next week. It's kind of like, it's a nice little gift. On that same note, there are also cantucci, which are what Americans call biscotti, but Italians just call cookies biscotti. So it's like when you're like, I want a biscotti, they're like, we have a ton of cookies. Like, what does that even mean? But when you're like at Starbucks or whatever the hell it is, can I say hell in this episode?
Yes, I think so.
I didn't know it slipped in there. I don't really swear. Whatever the heck it is, that's so much better. No, there's like, that Starbucks has like the single biscotti in a plastic wrap next to the checkout. Those are cantucci, at least, well, in Siena, they're cantucci, and quite famous for them. Like, you're kind of supposed to dip them or at least have them with the Vin Santo, as you mentioned. But I think every pasticceria, every forno will have some variation on it. So, I mean, they're all done by the weight as well. You can get one, but they're kind of like, I don't know, like 50 cents, 10 cents.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes. Okay. So we maybe have talked about this before, but the way pastry shops work is that you don't just get like a cookie, because also they're pretty small. Like, I mean, most pastries in Italy will fit in the palm of your hand. So they expect you to get several in either like a little bag, like if they're dry cookies, they can put them in a little bag, and it's by weight, and then by category of what kind of cookie you got or pastry. But you can also get them on a platter, so it's not typical to go in and just order one. Like,
it's like, I have one of the coffee or something like that's. It's usually like having by weight some with coffee.
Yeah,
or something
and I
like
guess
that.
I should clarify, whenever you go into like a typical pasticceria, they don't have coffee. You just go and buy your goods and then you bring them with you. But at like Nannini, that is a coffee shop, for lack of a better word, as well as a pasticceria. Thank you. So there you can get a cookie and a coffee.
And I think even there, though, they still do it by weight. That'll just be more expensive, like where it might be 18 a kilo at like pasticceria or something like that. It'll maybe like 22, 24 kilo Nannini, because if they don't make them there, they do buy them or something like that. It's hard to tell with these places, but if you like incredibly hard cookies, then go check out basic cantucci. There are a lot. I mean, some of them have like chocolate, almonds, dried fruit rinds, kind of a lot of options.
And there are so many other Tuscan
Oh yeah.
pastries that we had never seen before. They were these great, they almost look like American cookies, but it was like mixed between an American cookie and American muffin top.
Yeah.
But it was like filled with, one of them was filled with chocolate.
But it's like I thought it was chocolate and something. It was like chocolate nut or chocolate.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Those
it was
were
like they like a
delicious.
paste out of the chocolate. It was
And
really good.
then the cookie cracker things that you like, which have like spices and like pepper in them
Oh
sometimes.
man, I forgot about those. Yeah.
So yeah, highly recommend if you do eat sweets, if you like sweets, go into a pasticceria and just pick something.
Especially because it's not we'll. I mean, as we've mentioned earlier, there's no real gelato. Like Nanini has some gelato. It's not great. It's not amazing. It's not like if you're going to spend some time in Italy and you're going to go some other places, definitely try gelato in another place. It's not like the best. It's not even in the top 20 gelatos we've had. Which is all to say that like, but the pastries are easily in the top 5 of the pastries we've had. Like in the sense of like they're good, they're delicious, they're inventive, they're just. But it's also, it seems very Siena. Like even though panforte, everything I was looking at said they're like, oh, it's typical in the Tuscan region. I think we saw like once in Florence, maybe in the same time of year. But Siena, it was like every place had
Like this is our thing.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a bit of like a city pride around certain baked goods in Siena. So if you can eat, if you can't eat gluten, by the way, or wheat, obviously all the cantucci and things like that are off the table. But look at the panforte. Some of them do use like wheat flour just like as a binder, but by and large they are like gluten free.
And definitely ask, obviously.
Definitely ask, yeah. And it's because obviously being gluten free is sort of picking up, not popularity, but like people are being more aware of it, especially in bakeries and things like that. So they will try to have something available like that is slightly gluten free. But at the very least, panforte and things that there's some traditional things that are not made with gluten, as well as there are a lot of cookies that are just made with like almond flour or hazelnut flour, and then in the fall you'll see them a lot with chestnut flour, and so it'll be like, eggs, chestnut, and some nut flour, sugar, and maybe something else. So there's a lot of naturally gluten free pastries in Italy, thankfully. If you can't eat gluten. So I don't want like anyone listening to this like, oh man, that sounds so good, I wish I could eat it. There are definitely options for you. Don't worry.
Yeah, for sure. So 2 other places that I want to mention are Sclavi, which I mentioned specifically because we recommended one of the Sclavi bakeries in one of our previous episodes, but it doesn't seem to exist anymore at that location. So we're going to go back and take that off of the description in that episode.
It does. I mean, we literally recorded that episode 2 weeks ago, and it was there, and it was. I mean, it was exactly as I remember. And we spent maybe an hour today on Google Maps trying to find it until we're like, wait a second, did we like link this on a previous episode? Found it on the previous episode, and then it's just there's nothing for it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a shame because it was one of our favorite. Because we're not sure if Sclavi is a family name that must have like split some years ago, because there's a couple different Sclavi quote unquote bakeries and pasticcerias in Siena, but they don't taste the same. And I know that because
they're not consistent.
They are not. There's one in the Piazza del Campo. It is not the same flavor at all. Both like, I mean, the quality is not nearly as good, and the flavor is not nearly as good as the ones around town. So it's just a little bit of a shame to know the one that we like the most closed down. But there is Panificio Senesi.
Yes.
That's our Senese. That's pretty good, to be honest. It's like genuinely like, we've had a lot of basically amazing pastries there. Plus it does seem sort of small owned, small businessy.
And smaller than Nanini, which is also local, but big.
Yeah. There's also a Venchi there, Venchi. If you haven't been to Rome or anything like that yet, they're famous for like basically it's like a chocolate store / gelato / sweets. A lot of the locations have a chocolate wall, like it's a flowing
like a
chocolate wall.
Wall,
Chocolate fountainy wall. These aren't like that good. I just it's really branding more than anything else. It's not something that you're gonna be like blown away with. Basically, it's just gonna be like you might. I mean, I say that in the sense of like if you haven't had something like that before. Like you haven't had a Lindt chocolate before or something like that, or like a Baci or a Perugina or something like that, you might be like, wow, this is really good. But if you've had a Lindt or a Baci or Perugini, you're like,
you've probably tasted what this tastes like.
This is okay. Yeah, and it's weird because it's like one of those little, I don't know, I always call it the TikTok, Instagram kind of chains, like just because it's
Yeah.
very much catering towards everyone taking photos of them.
Yes.
Rather than actually
rather
just
than
being,
the flavor or
yeah.
the quality. Absolutely.
So something to consider if you do see the Venki and you're like, that looks like, this is really cool local place. It is very much not cool and local. However, if you want to go in and try it out, yeah.
More power to you.
More power to you. Full encourage.
So our last food location is a restaurant.
Yes.
Which we don't usually suggest restaurants.
That's true. We don't.
But this one we love so much. It's this little, quite family run, it seems like.
I think there's like 3 people there. Yeah, we went on a couple different occasions and then across a month and a half, and it was like, oh, same 3 people.
And it's awesome. It's quite small. But it's called Duversi, D-U space Versi.
Versi.
Mm-hmm. And it's local.
It's a very
Siena
limited
food.
menu.
Yes.
But I mean, there is like, I think, I want to say they call it pizza. Maybe it's pizza. Maybe it's something. There's some sort of flatbready thing they have a couple options of. I think we try. They're okay. Those are okay. They're good. I'm sorry. They're good. They're just like, if you're looking for pizza, it's not that. If you're
it's just not pizza for sure.
Yeah. If it's like, okay, this is a really good like flatbread type meal. However, they do have a limited but robust menu of the local dishes.
Yes.
Like the soup with the bread.
Mm-hmm. They really have, I say leaned into, but I shouldn't say that. It seems like their menu is centered around older and traditional style foods.
For sure.
Like Nathaniel said, the typical, it's the soup with the bread in it, which was weird, but I'm so glad I tried it. I mean, it tasted great. I have a texture problem with things. They have several different pasta dishes, which are different from the pasta dishes we have here in the South.
And just to mention too, I think we mentioned it in the Florence episode about food, that sometimes when something on the menu starts with a name you don't recognize, it's almost always going to, like, it's almost always going to be like a pasta. I think maybe not almost always, but I don't know. Sometimes it's like, well, there's the menu. Maybe it is separated by pasta, or maybe just primo secondi, because the primo had like lasagna, and it had a really nice melanzane lasagna. It had like a couple other dishes, but then it had like pappardelle, tagliatelle, pici, and then it had a few others, not like cavatelli, but a few other.
And those are names of the shape of the pasta.
Yeah, like tonarelli. So there's a lot of like, I would almost say more so than the South. The North really uses specific pasta shaped names.
But they also use specific like pasta recipe names
Mm-hmm,
that are unfamiliar to you and me. So sometimes when we read a menu, we don't know what it is. So we'll have to ask, like, what is this thing? Because it's describing, it doesn't list the ingredients in the dish necessarily, but Italians and people from Siena know that this name is associated with these ingredients in this recipe.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it. Plus, they also lean into the whole cingale, which we've talked about in the South here as well. It's a wild boar. But in Tuscany, they also use the wild boar in a lot of recipes. So there's like a pasta with it. It does seem to change slightly. Like, I think we went back, we went in September, and then I went again with my dad in like October, and there's some like, oh, that's a slight difference.
Yeah, I mean, their menu seems seasonal based on what they can get, which I love.
Yeah, no, it's honestly like fantastic. Plus, if you don't speak Italian, I don't believe the menu is in English. It could be, but I don't remember it being so, because I remember your mom asking us to translate. But they do speak Italian or English. I remember them coming over and saying hello, and then we were responding in Italian, and they're like, oh, okay, Italian, whatever. You're just, look at you, big shots. But if you're like concerned that we're sending you to this like Italian only restaurant, they are more than accommodating.
Yes, and they're so nice.
Yeah, very nice, genuinely. Nice. And so if you find yourself basically in Siena, you're hungry, you want to try a restaurant. We basically had dinner at 4 restaurants when we were there, 5 restaurants maybe. We stayed a couple nights with your mom and my dad, and that was probably that was definitely the best one we've had.
Yeah, for sure.
But it also felt the least just touristy. The other ones, they all felt just, I don't know, there's something just off, like just not off in the sense of like the food was okay, but it all just felt a little, like, I don't know.
It was, I mean, they were just catering to tourists. Yeah. In a lot of them.
Like you're feeling you're being worked, basically.
Yeah, and Duversi was the most affordable as well.
Oh my God. It was like, we really thought we were gonna pay out the nose the first night. And it ended up being like 40 euros, and we're like, wait a second. That's like, we got a lot. I mean, we got like a couple dishes, we got dessert, we got little after dinner drinks, we got wine. It's just sort of like 40 euros. Like, we were easily expecting 60, 70. I mean, because I think the one night we had dinner in Florence at a restaurant was like 80.
It was like almost 100.
Yeah, and I think 20 was just on the bottle of wine, which
That's
is like
crazy.
kind of ridiculous. I mean, not ridiculous at all. It's very affordable wine. It's just one of those things where it's like, oh, I've seen this bottle at the grocery store for like 4. Like this is I heard of markups before. My God. But no, it's incredible. I mean, just it's one of those places that like the house wine is actually like €4 for a liter or whatever it was, maybe a little more than that,
Whatever it
€6
is,
a
yeah.
liter. But that's something we're used to, especially in the South, where it's like it's not good wine. It's just cheap, and we give you a lot. It was also quite fizzy, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it was great.
I thought it was really nice.
All of it seems very local and homemade and like seasonal.
5 stars.
Yeah,
Just go
amazing.
check it out.
They're amazing.
If you're there.
So, do you want to talk about day trips now to finish up?
Let's do it.
Okay.
It's a nice segue.
So, I want to talk about first where the bus. It's not a station.
It is a bus piazza, yeah. But it's almost like a bus roundabout bus. It's a pull off. What is that called? Like when you pull off on the side of the road?
I don't remember what those are called.
Okay. Well, it's like, those things where on the side of the road you can like pull off of the highway, and then you don't get hit by a car.
It's like a little car park for buses.
Little car park for buses, yeah. And it's city buses as well as like regional buses for the auto line, Tuscany auto line, the Autolinee Toscana. We recommended in the Florence episode. If you've heard of it, you remember it. But if you have not heard of our Florence episode, shame on you. You should go listen to it. I'm totally kidding. No, but if you have not heard our Florence episode, we mentioned that like Flixbus and some of the other ones don't come to this one. They kind of come a little outside of town. And the train, well, actually, sorry, the Flixbuses do go to the train station, but the train also goes to the train station. And that's just sort of at the bottom of the town. It's a little bit of a walk away through kind of like suburban-y apartment building areas. It's
a walk away from the main part of Siena.
Yeah, it's.
I think it's a bus ride away.
Well, I mean, you could 20, 25 minutes. You could probably walk it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't
Uphill,
recommend it, but
no, it's very much uphill. Yeah. It's kind of a nightmare. We have not attempted it.
Walking from it.
Yeah,
yeah. But when we go to Siena, we arrive by train to that train station and take the bus up into town.
Right, because we also done the bus though into town and realized it was just so much easier because the Autolinee Toscana is like that's just straight in there. Like it's the Piazza Gramsci, and there's also it might be a little difficult to find, but when you're looking for tickets to leave Siena, there are a couple of like staircases that go under the piazza around.
Yeah, you wouldn't know they're there necessarily. So when you enter the piazza, which looks like a quite pretty bus car park area, there are, like Nathaniel said, sort of across the street from the buses. This is all going from the center of Siena, if you think of like where the Piazza del Campo is, and then walking towards that park we were talking about earlier called Fortezza Medicea. So if you're walking from the piazza to the fort, you're going to pass the bus car parking area. And across the street from the buses, there are these 2 staircases that go down underground, and that's where the ticket office is.
It's a little strange.
It is strange, but it is great because you can go there the same day that you need a bus ticket, or you can, if you're staying in Siena, you can go a few days ahead of time and get tickets, like for day trips or going to your next location. You could just buy them at the station rather than buying them online.
Yeah. No, I think that it makes it a lot easier because they're kind of evergreen tickets.
Yeah.
And if you happen to go to another town or something like that, they're not. You can't get tickets on board. Is basically the takeaway here.
Yes.
You have to get tickets ahead of time, and you have to validate them on board. So if you're not going from like Siena, Poggibonsi, Florence, then it's a little difficult. In that same thing, we're going to talk about San Gimignano in a second as a day trip. I don't recall seeing a place to buy a ticket in San Gimignano, so it's helpful to have your, you're there in return, you're going and return tickets. There might be something, there might be like a little tabaccaria or something that sells them. It's hard though to know like before you get there. So I'm always somebody who travels around with extra tickets. I'd rather spend the €4 or €5 to like, that's a waste. Or even just give them away to somebody before we leave, rather than like find ourselves without tickets.
Well, we just got like a trip there and a return ticket is what we
Yeah. Plus, those tickets are not for a town; they are for a distance. And so basically, it just means they're going to give you a handful of tickets, that you can take to San Gimignano, but you can also take anything else in that distance. So if you decide, like, you know what, not San Gimignano, let's go to something else instead. You can ask them, like, can I use this ticket for so and so? And they're like, yeah, of course. You don't have to buy new tickets. You don't have to, like, you're not locked into like a certain.
Yeah, it just depends on where that
Yeah, how far away that town is.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of other towns.
Well, I do want to just note.
Oh
so
yeah,
San
let's talk about San Gimignano. We haven't
is-
actually talked about it, do we? I just talked about getting there.
It's an hour away
Okay.
from Siena, and it's about €5 for the ticket there
You also have to switch, I believe.
in Poggibonsi.
Yes.
That is Poggibonsi. In my
Poggibonsi.
American accent.
Yeah, you have to switch there. Now, if I'm not mistaken, one time we switched buses. Another time we stopped there and they did a switch, but we did not switch.
Yes, but they will say like
Si cambia, which means change, like kind of, it means change, but they'll do something like Siena, like this, that, the other thing, si cambia.
right.
So if you hear like where you're going and then si cambia afterwards, it means change. But you can always go to the bus driver, point at the bus and be like Siena or San Gimignano. And then San
Yeah.
Gimignano also looks like San Gimignano.
Yeah.
So it's not Ganano, it's the G and the N make a nya, as in like gnocchi, San Gimignano.
And while we're talking about pronouncing places, I don't think we said that whenever we pronounce the name of the bus park is Gramsci. No, Gramsci.
Yeah, Gramsci.
She is spelled SCI, so it's going to look like Gramsci.
Gramsci, yeah, no, but it's Gramsci. So that's the other thing. If you
Scienza,
like, people are like
science.
Gramsci, and you're like, no, Gramsci, and they're like, no, Gramsci.
Yeah.
We've been there a lot where people were like telling us how to pronounce something. I'm like, there's no way that's right. Like I think so I was asking somebody how to say environment, and they're like ambiente. I'm like, no, not the and like ambience, like the environment. And it's this whole thing. I'm like, I'm such an idiot. Yeah, I meant ambiente, grazie. So it will happen to everybody, I think. I
So
hope.
San Gimignano.
Tower of City of like 13 towers or something
Yes,
like that.
lots
That's
of
remaining. Beautiful one street. We talked about this in the Florence episode. Again, we're not trying to rush through this for any particular reason, but it's a beautiful little town. 2 gelaterias. I think one or both have won some sort of competition.
So, yeah.
It's just one long street basically, with a bunch of side streets. That's not like 100% accurate, but it's pretty much dead on accurate.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Great. Honestly, it's a really funky, weird little area. My opinion of it is pretty much colored, I think, because it was raining that day, so it was beautiful. It was like not empty necessarily, but just something a little bit more mystical about the town.
Yes.
I imagine middle of summer when it's super hot, it might be a little less exciting, because it kind of goes back to that thing about shade and trees. But it's beautiful, and the people still living there, in the sense that they still have apartments and houses, and so there's a little sense of like vibrancy. But by and large, as you mentioned in the previous episode about this, a lot of artisans, a lot of local natural foods, sausages, wine, pastries, things like that. No, it's it's a great little town to go to, especially if you're just interested in culinary experiences, or if you're just interested in seeing what Siena might have looked like a couple hundred years ago, because Siena also had tons of towers that have since pretty much fallen down.
Or seeing a version of a small Italian town which is still thriving.
Yes.
Because we live in a small Italian town which is not thriving.
And does not look anything like San Gimignano.
No, it does not. But I think a lot of people want to see like what old Italy looks like, authentic Italy. And San Gimignano, while they're very used to tourists, so it's not like the most undiscovered place, obviously, but seems quite thriving, and it is quite small and quite old, so it's great to see.
It's a beautiful town. Basically it's a great day trip.
So our next place is Perugia, and we'll probably talk about them in their own episode.
I think like the next episode or one of the succeeding episodes, one of the ones after this will be about Perugia, because we realize it is quite famous for a few different handful of things. Plus, it's a
and
great.
We've lived there, so
and we've lived there, so
quite
I
a bit
think
of knowledge on it.
Some inside knowledge.
But you can get there with Flixbus. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, and it costs about €7 to get there.
That's not bad at all. Yeah, and you'll have to take the bus though from the train station to Perugia, which it'll drop you off at Piazza Partigiana. That's just because we've lived there, so we know where it drops you off. I didn't have to look that up. And that's not that far away, basically. It's not like the top of the town by any means, but it's pretty close to it. It's a little stroll up, but it's much closer than the train station, because the train station in Perugia, you have to pretty much take the funicular up to the town, because walking there takes an hour and a half by foot going uphill, maybe an hour by foot going uphill. So Perugia, great day trip, I think. It's a similar but different
city.
Yeah, it's similar but different though to Siena.
Yeah, but I would you say the population is maybe about the same?
That's a good question because it's hard to tell. Like, I would almost say it's more, in some senses, it's almost more populated, even though Siena has the University of Siena.
Perugia has several
yeah,
universities.
the Foreigners University, their own university. There's something else there's like engineers. There is an
maybe?
agriculture university. So it's tons of students, which makes it feel really quite densely populated.
During the school year, especially.
During the school year. And we don't get the same, like Siena, there's definitely a little feeling sometimes of certain areas where like, people don't live here. Like it's like Airbnbs, or maybe it's like it's just sort of like, this event space is not apartments up above these shops. It's not like actually thriving, but Perugia definitely has the like, this is like tons of people and tons of things happening. But it's a very different, similar town, if that makes sense. It's very different in the sense of it's nothing like Siena,
Right.
but it's similar in the sense of it's a hilltop town, similar era, similar architecture, and a similar vibe.
Yeah, for sure, but quite different. Florence,
Yeah, of course.
talked about it in the last
Classic.
episode, but it's an easy day trip from Siena. It's an hour and a half by train, and it costs 10 euros.
There's also a bus, the Autolinea Toscana, as we've mentioned.
Yes.
That one almost might be easier, could be only because
I
it
do.
does.
Yeah, I
leave-
recommend that. I didn't say it because I don't know how much the tickets are, but you can get the
I
tickets.
believe they're cheaper because we took the train back with my dad and my brother. We went to Siena on the bus and we took the train back because although it was more expensive, it was like, I don't know, one of those silly little things where it was like 15, it's supposed to be 15 minutes quicker. And plus they really hadn't had that much train travel, the two of them. And they both kind of like the idea of like being on a train in Italy. So I was like, yeah, we'll take the train back.
So the train you obviously get in Siena from the train station, but then the bus will arrive and leave from the
Piazza Gramsci.
Yes, thank you.
So that makes it a lot easier. Plus, the bus station in Florence is just right next to Santa Maria Novella, which is the train station. I mean, they're practically touching. So it drops you right in the middle of town. And although Florence is much bigger than Siena, it's just one of those things. If you for some reason booked 4 or 5 days in Siena, and then you saw it in a day or two, and you're like, wow, I've got nothing to do for 3 days. You can absolutely see the big sights of Florence in a day.
Yeah.
Like the Duomo, or maybe one of the galleries, the Uffizi or the Accademia. Have some good food, have some sandwiches, go to our favorite place.
Yeah, da Vinatieri for sandwiches.
For sandwiches, I think that'd be great. No, I think it's Florence just is quite an easy day trip from Siena. If you happen to book more time in Siena than you did Florence, basically.
Yeah.
Like we did, because we planned to be driving around Tuscany, and that
Didn't pan out.
didn't pan out as expected.
But anyway, so our last recommendation for day trips is Pisa, which is a bit farther than the other day trips that we recommend. It's 2.5 hours away, but it's only 12 euros to get there. And I think it's a pretty good destination for a day trip because you go look at the Leaning Tower, have a wander around, and then you're done.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a nice little thing. It's basically, and I think we'll talk about Cinque Terre a little later, maybe the next episode, maybe some other episode. But you do have to go through Pisa. You pretty much, if you're coming from Rome, or I think even Florence. So there's a possibility to kind of hop off, see it for an hour, and then take a later train. If a day trip sounds a little bit too spicy, a little too much to handle. But by and large, I think like one other recommendation is, we've heard it a lot. We were planning on doing it ourselves, as we just mentioned, but renting a car and driving around, it's one of those things that's so un-American because, I mean, we're coming from this sort of American mindset, but if you're English, it's a little bit more, our experience, at least around Edinburgh, is a little bit more natural, but these like hamlets or these little like, I mean, they're listed as towns on like Google Maps or Apple Maps or something like that. But I mean, they literally might be like a church, 2 or 3 buildings, and that's it. Some of them, maybe there's like a B&B there. Maybe there's like, I don't know. Sometimes there's something there like that people go to for dinner. But by and large, there's like, there's these tons of these really beautiful, tiny little hamlets, I think, for lack of a better word, all around Tuscany, just dotted around. And you can basically park there, hop out of the car, walk around, take a picture, have picnic, and then kind of keep going. And like San Gimignano, for instance, you can absolutely drive there, as we were planning on, because there's a parking lot outside. It's not like an ugly parking lot. It's like a nice little roundabouty parking lot. I don't think they allow cars in the center, or maybe they do, but only for residents. But that's just something to consider. Like if you're comfortable driving in Italy, if you have an international driver's permit, or a license valid in Italy. It's not a bad idea because there's a lot of really hidden, beautiful things in Tuscany specifically, but also as you dip into Umbria. There's a lot of really beautiful areas, beautiful towns, tiny towns, hamlets, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're just not really feasible to get there by bus because there's no buses there because there's no people who need the bus there.
Yeah. There's no demand for buses.
There's no demand for buses. So it's a little bit of shame sometimes. But if you like the idea of kind of getting out there, just exploring and having a blast, having a couple days, using Siena as a home base and then driving around is a better idea in my opinion than trying to use Florence as a home base and driving around because Siena's a little...
Florence is a good idea for a home base with public transportation.
For sure,
I think.
yeah.
Siena is a good idea as a home base with, when you have a car.
Because there's a lot of parking lots around.
And if you have a party, a party of people, if you have a group of people who like wine and then a designated driver, it's
exactly
great for visiting wineries. If you all want to drink...
maybe like one day on, one day off. Yeah, like somebody doesn't get to try that day, or you bring a bottle back or something. Mm-hmm. Only because we've mentioned before that there's a very, very low tolerance for alcohol while driving, like much lower than it is in the States. Mm-hmm. So it's just one of those things where like people here will maybe have a glass of wine or a beer if they're out to dinner, and that's it. If they have two, we've often been with people who have to wait like a couple hours until
have
we can
some bread
leave.
Or something.
Yeah, because I can't I'm completely coherent. 2 beers is not like a lot by any standards here, but it's sort of like, well, it's a legal amount of an illegal amount of alcohol to drive with. Mm-hmm. So that's just something to consider. But yeah, you're the Chianti region, the Montepulciano region. Vernaccia is the wine around San Gimignano. I think it's just a white grape, but also the Italian the entire region. Not only has just like Chianti and stuff like that, but there's a lot of really tiny, really like special to that one town or that one area, grapes and vineyards that you can go and you can call and visit and try things. And of course, bring bottles back with you. Mm-hmm. So that's something if you are interested in. Tuscany is quite famous, obviously, for that. So we're not like suggesting anything new, but I think you and I are often like giving the public transportation version of something.
Yes.
And if there is anywhere that you're going to drive, like number one top of the list would be Tuscany, and then number two is in the south, just because public transportation, as we will talk about when we get to the south, is a little less steady, a little less reliable.
Yes.
But I think that,
I think that's pretty much it, but I do actually want to mention, thinking about local wines, local foods, you and I loved, probably way too much, we were like geeking out about it. In Siena, they have the Agricultural Association shop.
Yeah.
And it is right next to the Piazza del Campo. It's on the it's just off the main street.
It's actually closer though to the Piazza Gramsci.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
You're right.
Just in case, it's because it's it almost looks like a grocery store.
It does. It's like a big glass.
Yeah. Fronted grocery store. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's they do have some products in there that are international, but I think the point of it is local products that you can go and buy there.
They have tons of wine. They have a whole panificio, like a bakery, and they're making bread, they're making pizzas, they're making cantucci, they're making also. It smells amazing. Local olive oil from the area, local olives from the area, cheeses, meats, a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of it is like, but even sometimes like we found at the grocery store, actually, we found a laundry soap that was from Tuscany. It's like an olive oil based laundry soap.
Y'all. This laundry soap is amazing. We need to tell them what the grocery store was at.
I think it was just a Conad.
Was it a Conad or a Coop?
No, I think it was just a Conad.
Okay.
It was the one that was all weird and hidden.
Okay.
But it was like Darcy was like, "Don't get it. You're not going to bring it back." And I was like, "I'm going to stick it in the water bottle pocket and have this for the week we're left traveling." But it was.
And we've been using it for a long time.
Yeah, it just like recently ran out.
It's amazing.
Not that we don't wash our clothes that often. It's just one of those things where you only have to use a little bit. It's very sudsy.
Yes.
To clarify. No, but that's a great location. I think that it's a Consorzio della Agricola. Yeah. Something like that. Siena. It's got some sort of a consortium name. But it's great. Jams, jellies, honey, the whole, everything you can kind of think of. If you want it local, you can find it there. And it's, I think, personally better for like buying gifts or something to bring back. Less so if you have an Airbnb and you're just kind of looking for something for the few nights, because there's a lot of grocery stores like Pam and Conad and things like that you can go ahead and just buy like food for the
Regular
next couple
items.
days.
And also local items. I mean, if you're looking for local wine, the regular Pam, Coop, Conad will have local wines. You just, read the label.
Plus, they have like local pastas. The Conad always has this like I don't know, like it's called like sapori di Conad maybe, or sapori di something, and it's just like there's sort of fancy items.
What was that pasta that you liked?
It's called Pici, Pici, and it's sort of a very, very, very thick spaghetti. You're supposed to cook it for like 13 minutes instead of spaghetti's like 7, but it's typical in Siena, and it's quite yummy. But I think that's like, yeah, if you, that'd be a huge, basically if you're there, I would 100% recommend going, checking some stuff out, panforte, that kind of stuff, Vinsanto, the whole 9 yards, stock up, try some things, and then maybe stock up for your trip back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we didn't mention, sorry, last thing, and then we're going to leave you all alone because we're already an hour and a half. I'm assuming, like, you're pretending this is like a Zoom call that you can't leave. I don't know what I'm thinking. No, we didn't. We kind of briefly mentioned earlier in the episode, and we forgot to mention it when we talked about the Duomo. But the reason we're also linking at tickets with a Q, link in the description that helps out the channel if you buy through our link. It's €1 more expensive. It's 9 instead of 8. Because on the actual website, but the actual website is very, very unclear. There's a bunch of like hoops you have to go through to find these tickets. The payment portal is not very clear.
Even the titles on the tickets aren't clear.
The titles on the tickets
it's like they
unintelligible.
named a file, and that became the name of what ticket you get. So it's very unclear about what you're buying and what ticket you need.
Plus, it's in Italian, and for whatever reason, like the Google Translate on the computer, like you have like on Chrome or Firefox, you can have a little translate option. Doesn't work on the file types, just because I don't know why. So like you can't translate it to see what it is in English. So it's a little bit unclear. And, it didn't want anyone to have this nightmare of a time trying to find a ticket when, although tickets is €1 more, it is literally in English. And so like click to buy, click my day, purchase.
And when you buy tickets in person, which you can do, so there's a line to purchase tickets and then you have to get in the line to go in. So it's a 2-line situation if you buy tickets.
It is a 2-line situation. And I believe it's €1 cheaper in person. Do not hold me to that, but what I was reading was that there's a slight online upcharge of like €1, but they recommended because sometimes that line for the tickets is just insane. And when we were there, it was the very end of COVID regulations, so they were kind of limiting people going in at once. And so, but one way of limiting it was simply stopping the line for tickets. So it was just one of those things where like this is just murder, and that might have colored my opinion, I think, of the Duomo quite a bit. But no, a number of people were just holding up their phone and getting scanned and going right through. So I realized like in the future, that's probably much easier. So that's something we didn't mention. But all that being said, I think that's everything on Siena.
I think that's everything. We got everything in one episode.
The giant best of Siena episode, what you do, what you don't. We didn't really talk about what you don't, but I just, basically don't do the things we didn't list.
No, do whatever you want. No, Siena's great. It's a great place to wander around and just pop into.
It's a great place to be lost, I think, know, because it's like it's hard to actually be lost, but it's a great place to, like you said, pop into shops and just like ask questions. A lot of people speak English. A lot of people are familiar with tourists. Everyone's happy to just entertain curiosity. We found whether there's an art shop or candle shop or a wine shop, everyone's just happy to have questions and just sort of make connections. So
absolutely,
don't feel like embarrassed or anything like that, but like asking, what is this? How you do this? What's the process there? Blah 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 blah. It seems like they're very open to that, and everyone's very happy and accommodating. So we highly recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful place to go.
And is there anything else? Any final words?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for watching this episode through your headphones, listening to us. And again, if you would like to support us, there's a link to tickets and train line in the description. Please, we would love it if you were to follow us on Spotify, leave a review on like Apple Podcasts or Google review, wherever you listen to this. And
maybe recommend us to a friend.
And tell a friend about us. Be like, you know what? You like Italy, right? Check out this podcast. Or something else. You can actually maybe
you have your own agency. You can choose what
totally
to say.
That. Oh, agency is like as a person. I was thinking,
not
you have your own agent. Get them to connect with some friends. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. And yeah, we're sorry we put it out one day late, but we just didn't yesterday.
No excuses. We just didn't yesterday.
Zero excuses.
So thanks for listening. And we'll talk to you again about somewhere else in Italy next time.
Yes, next episode will either be Perugia or Rio Maggiore in Cinque Terre. We have not decided yet. Let's keep things spicy.
Maybe we could do like a lottery like they do for the horses.
We could totally do a lottery.
Just the two.
Draw numbers. Just the two. It's one of the two. It's one of the two ping pong balls. All right. Thank you all so much for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.
Absolutely.